The Southern Hemisphere, beautiful place. But I visited there, I only had a weekend. And even though it's a relatively small country, it was a lot of traveling. And what I found myself doing was driving through all of these interesting places and saying, wow, that's really interesting. I want to go back there one day and see that. Well, this little session is going to be like a 30-minute third gear tour through the town of Story. And so we'll cover a bunch of things, but obviously it's just going to be an introduction. But I hope that what you'll do is you'll see some interesting things that say, oh, I want to know more about that. So what I'll be talking about is how you can improve your leadership performance, your leadership effectiveness, simply by being more specific. Last week, I was running our Story-Powered Leadership program, and I asked a question that I've asked hundreds of times to thousands of people. One of the participants responded, or the question is, describe what you do for a living. One of the participants said something like this. I lead a cross-functional team. We're focused on building organizational capability to deliver systemic operational improvements that drive business performance across the entire organization. And even though that was only a few seconds, many of you might have been nodding off in the middle of it. Right? That is a very non-specific response, and it's highly abstract. It's completely forgettable. It's not very interesting. And yet, that question has been asked to thousands of people across hundreds of programs across the last 20 years, and almost without exception, that's the type of answer that people give. And I'm going to show you there's a different way, a much more powerful, much more impactful, much more specific way of answering that question. By the way, we don't just do it in our business lives. It's kind of endemic in our communications organizationally. For governments, NGOs, etc. Right? It happens a lot. And I want to give you so what I just gave you, a very specific example of what happens in an organization, and now something that you see happening in the world. Now, we all know that the Syrian conflict started in 2011. Pro-democracy protests were handled very ruthlessly, led to a civil uprising, civil war, and by May 2011, so only a couple of months after that, there was tens of thousands of Syrians internally displaced and fleeing the country as refugees. Now, this grew into possibly the biggest humanitarian crisis we've ever seen. 5.6 million Syrians fled the country as refugees looking for a safer and better life elsewhere. And another 6.1 million were internally displaced. Nearly 2,500 Syrians died each year trying to cross the Mediterranean to get to safety. And despite this, the enormity of the statistics that I've just given you, countries across the world faced a question: do we help them or not? Now, some countries did, but many countries didn't. Now, Australia is where I'm based, right? Australia, our government had a very firm position, and it was, we have a very generous humanitarian intake. If these refugees are genuine, then they just take their place in the queue like everyone else. And the government held that line for 4 years. Right, for 4 years, all of this data, all these people drowning, crossing the Mediterranean, until on the 2nd of September, 2015, pretty much every human being on the planet saw an image. And I'm going to show you that image. And I apologize if it's a little bit insensitive. It's a very shocking image. Right, that's the image of Alan Kurdi, 3-year-old Syrian refugee who washed up on the shore of the Turkish beach after he and his family had tried to get to a Greek island and to safety, to a better life. That was the 2nd of September. 2015. 7 days later, the Australian government, this was the headline, the Australian government, led by our Prime Minister at the time, Tony Abbott, announced that they were going to resettle an additional 12,000 Syrian refugees. Now, think about it. For 4 years, we've been faced with the enormity of the data, the 6.1 million and the 5.6 million and the 2,500. But here's the thing. It took that one instance, that huge impact of seeing that, to cause these governments to change their minds. That is the power of specificity. And what I want to talk to you about is how we make the mistake in business of thinking that all of our data and facts are going to have an impact and change people's minds. They have some utility, but there's a way that you can make them even more effective, and that's by using a story, a specific example. So that's what we're going to talk about. And the reason that this quote I love from Canadian neurologist Donald Kahn, who wrote the book Within Reason. The essential difference between emotion and reason is that reason leads to conclusions while emotion leads to action. And the beauty of using story is that it gives us a way of tapping into both logic and reason and emotion. So I'm going to talk about that. So whether we like it or not, whether we're aware of it or not, every time you get asked a question, every time you get to describe one of your values or why you've made a decision or whatever, you have a choice. And the choice is either to be abstract or specific. And I'm going to show you what that choice looks like. So we'll show you a clip that goes for 3 minutes. It's from a TV show called West Wing. I only chose it because it shows clearly the ends of the spectrum. On the left-hand side of your screen is Scott Tate, who's he's from NASA Public Affairs, and he has a communication style. On the right-hand side of your screen, Sam Seaborn. He's the president's scriptwriter. He has a completely different presentation style. Please watch the clip and note the presentation styles, and then we'll unpack it a little bit. So, Artem, if you could play that clip, please.
Who wrote this intro?
I did.
You're from NASA Public Affairs?
Yeah.
You mind if I give it a polish?
Is there a problem?
No, it's great. You mind if I change it?
I'd prefer if you didn't.
Just the same.
Public Affairs has cleared the text. If it's going to be changed, I'd prefer if the president changed it.
See, that's kind of what he pays me to do, so.
Well, I kind of want to step on your toes. You don't want to step on mine. We're both writers.
Yes, I suppose if we broaden the definition to those who can spell.
Excuse me?
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. President. Sir, this is the crew from NASA Public Affairs.
How you doing?
Sir, we're going to run you through the drill for tomorrow morning. First of all, you'll be flanked on either side by the Flight Operations Manager, David Narakawa, and NASA Chief Administrator, Dr. Peter Jobson. On either side of them will be Dr. Samuel Thurman of the Meteorite Analysis Team from the Johnson Space Center and Dr. Joyce Gray Sutton, planetary geologist from Cal State Northridge. On these monitors, you'll be seeing the images beam back from the surface, and on this computer screen, you'll be able to read the questions being sent in by the kids. I strongly urge you.
Yes.
I strongly urge you.
I know.
I strongly urge you, Mr. President, to act as moderator and pass the questions off to one of the experts on the panel rather than answer it yourself.
Yes.
Would you like to see some of the questions?
We have questions in advance.
Some of them, would you put them up?
Sure. Katie, 6th grader, Green Oaks, Junior High School, Austin, Texas, asked, how old is the planet Mars? That's a great question, Katie. The planet Mars is 4.6 billion years old.
What did I just say?
I knew that one.
Nobody likes a know-it-all.
Yes, God forbid that while talking to 60,000 public school students, the president should appear smart.
That's fine, just don't show off.
I don't show off. Stevie, 4th grader, PS31, Manhattan, asked, what is the temperature on Mars? Well, Stevie, if one of our expert panelists were here, they would tell you the average temperature ranges from 15 degrees to minus 140.
That happens to be wrong. It ranges from 60 to minus 225.
I converted it to Celsius in my head.
Thank you.
Can I see the intro? It's up on the prompt. Good morning. I'm speaking to you live from the West Wing of the White House. Today, we have a very unique opportunity to take part live in an extremely historic event with, whoa, boy. How you doing, Mr. President? Who wrote this intro?
I did, sir. I'm Scott Tate from NASA Public Affairs.
Scott, unique means one of a kind. Something can't be very unique, nor can it be extremely historic.
While we're at it, do we have to use the word live twice in the first two sentences like we just cracked the technology?
Look,
we're also broadcasting in living color, right?
Sam? Yeah. He's going to make some changes.
you going to clear him with me?
I doubt it. Write this. Good morning. 11 months ago, a 1,200-pound spacecraft blasted off from Cape Canaveral, Florida. 18 hours ago, is it 18 hours ago? We're on the air at noon Eastern.
Yeah.
18 hours ago, it landed on the planet Mars. You, me, and 60,000 of your fellow students across the country, along with astroscientists and engineers from the Jet Propulsion Lab in Southern California, NASA Houston, and right here at the White House, we're going to be the first to see what it sees and to chronicle the extraordinary voyage of an unmanned ship called Galileo 5.
He said it
Okay.
right.
So I'm pretty sure that everyone on the call would rather be on the guy on the right, Sam Seaborn, than the guy on the left, Scott Tate. It's a completely different type of communication. And we'll unpack that in a minute. But what I'd ask you to do right now is to find the chat window and just type in one or two words that describe your reaction. So one or two words that describe your reaction to Scott Tate's version. So just one or two words. What's your reaction to his version? Boring, classical, boring, technical, smart, boring. Yeah, sweet, involve me. Okay, right, you get the idea. Okay, it's not very positive. Academic script, you switched off. Yep, okay. Let's try the other guy. So what's exactly the same procedure. Find the chat window, just type a couple of words to describe Sam Seaborn's version. 11 months ago, a 1,200-pound spaceship, etc. All right, so Siegfried, engaging, exciting, exciting. Yes, you seemed to be carried along. It started in action, it drew a picture. Yes, it was live. Emotionally, okay, you get the idea, right? There's a completely different human reaction to those different communication styles. And believe me, those styles are simply choices. This is not natural talent. This is simply choice. Now, over the last few years, we've asked this question of thousands of leaders, and we've assembled their responses into a word cloud. And with a word cloud, the bigger the word, the more frequent the response. And you can see that the response across thousands of people across the globe, pretty similar to the ones that were in the chat window just a second ago. So the number one is boring, cold, dry, formal, technical, impersonal, meaningless, apathetic, arrogant, blah, flat. The human response to that style is not good. And by contrast, here's the word cloud for Sam Seaborn. Emotive, engaging, impactful, inclusive, visual, story, inspiring, journey, passionate. You get the idea. All right. So as I say, this is totally a choice, and just introduce this little diagram, a way of talking about these choices. Scott Tate from NASA Public Affairs uses what we call the assertion method. So he's got lots of statements, lots of assertions, lots of opinions. Sam Seaborn, on the other hand, he uses event-based communication. He talks about things in terms of events, moments, things that you can see, things that you can feel. It's story. So Scott Tate at the top, assertion. Sam Seaborn, story. And you can see the little bar charts on the right. The impact of the assertion method is relatively low. I mean, it has utility for sure, but the impact of the story method is huge. And the huge opportunity we all have as leaders is to do more of it, because across the last 20 years that we've been studying this, the frequency of use of the assertion method is predominant. It's 90 to 95% of our leadership communication. And so we're leaving a huge amount of value on the table because we hardly use story at all. And so a great way to improve your effectiveness is to use story to have more impact, to be more engaging, to be more understandable, to be more memorable. All right, so one of the things that's really worth understanding is that if you have the assertion method, the Scott-Tate method, even if the issue that you're talking about is really important, even if the people who are listening to you will get enormous value from the thing that you're saying, if you choose the assertion method, because it's what we call a push strategy, you're pushing your messages at people, the human response is to resist. And so that by adopting the assertion method, you actually create resistance that makes your job harder. And so my advice is don't, right? Be aware that this is simply a choice. And if you make the assertion choice, you make your job as a leader harder to change people's minds, harder to get people engaged, harder to get them to understand. Story, on the other hand, is a well, that's, slide's not there. Story is a pull strategy. You describe something that happens, people can imagine it in their mind, and they're drawn into it, right? They pull the story towards them, and it has a completely different impact. Feels much more inclusive. All right, so as a leader, here's some things that you can do. Every time you want to make a point, you can use a story. I'm not suggesting you do it every time, but you can. And one of the beauties about story is because it has the combination of both reason and logic and data. It's got all those things, but it also has context and emotion. So here's a good way of thinking about story. They're facts wrapped in context and delivered with emotion. But what do we do to use this thing called story more? Now, Sean Callahan, who's speaking next, he and I, we have a podcast called Anecdotally Speaking, and we recorded a couple of episodes earlier today. And this little diagram in front of you, we talk about it as the key to unlocking the power of storytelling. Now, on the podcast today, Sean gave an example of something that happened to him in in late 1980s, and he'd been asked. He was working for a technology company, Oracle or Sybase or something like that. They were working on a geographic information system, and he was tasked with going and finding the algorithms that would enable them to geolocate data. Now, Sean pretty confidently went off to the library and went searching, and he couldn't find the algorithms that he was looking for. He used a whole bunch of search terms, geographic information systems, and a whole bunch of other technical things that I can't even remember. And he went from being really, really optimistic on day one to spending an entire week in the library getting increasingly frustrated, and then realizing that he was going to have to go back and tell everybody he couldn't find anything. He couldn't find these algorithms until he was reading a journal article, and because you had to read through all the articles to find out if there were any useful information. And he came across a term called computational geometry. Now, he had this light bulb moment. He goes, that's it. And he went and he searched into the library system, computational geometry, and he found all these algorithms. And they were all written out, all coded in Fortran, all easily translatable, all directly relevant to the project. And he goes back to the team, and he was a bit of a hero because he found it. But it was all because he found the key, right? In this case, it was the term computational geometry that allowed him into, it gave him a doorway into a whole field of research that was really important to his work. This framework that's on the screen in front of you now is the key. It's the doorway to unlocking the power of story. And it's super simple. And if you want more information, we've written heaps about it on our website. And this is not a definition. This is not a definition. It's simply a little model that is useful to help you identify this thing. What did Sam Seaborn do? Well, the first thing is that stories are events that happen in a time and a place. So you start with a time marker or a place marker, sometimes both. And for the video you just saw, it took 5 seconds. He said, 11 months ago, right, that's a time marker. So 11 months ago, a 1,200-pound spacecraft blasted off from Cape Canaveral, Florida. Time and place, huge amount of context given in those first few seconds. The next thing that a story has, the second icon, is a series of connected events. They're things that happen. They're not ideas, they're not concepts, they're not opinions, they're not assertions, they're not statements. They're events, and they occur in a causal sequence. Stories also have characters, and something interesting happens. So once you've got those four things, then you've got a potentially usable story. So what do you do once you've got a story? Well, you use it to make a point. So as a leader, you can take a story just as I did with the story about Sean and computational geometry. You can take it and make a point. So you have a relevant statement that tells the listener, why are you listening to me? Why might you even be interested in this? Then you have your story, and then you land your point. It's really quite simple. I'll give you a couple of examples. As I say, this is completely not art. This is purely skill. It's purely choice. And just by using these very simple concepts, you can make new choices that will improve your leadership effectiveness. So I might want to make a point about leaders need to lead by example no matter how senior they are. Many years ago, Victoria Mars, who was at that time about 60 years old, she was the CEO of the Mars Company, right? Mars Confectionery. They make the Mars bar all over the world. Victoria was so she's 60 odd years old. She's very elegant, very dignified, beautifully dressed, well-spoken. She's arrived in Malaysia and she's doing a tour, and the sales manager was very excited to show her the new displays that they were putting into supermarkets of their pet food whiskers. So they walk into one of the supermarkets and they turn a corner, and one of their sales associates was down on her knees, and there were cans all over the place, and she was trying to finish the display. She'd been busy all afternoon, and the sales manager was furious. You saw his face just went red, and he started striding towards the young lady putting the stand together. Victoria Mars saw this and walked faster than him, and she got there first and jumped straight down onto her knees and started stacking the shelves and helping the young lady. The sales manager started to do the same. So what you saw there is Victoria Mars made a conscious choice to lead by example. Didn't matter how senior she was, she wanted that staff member to have a good experience. So, relevant statement, story, point. Doesn't take long. It only takes a couple of minutes, but you can make a huge impact within just a short space of time. Now, another example. I saw this little story in a magazine 3 or 4 years ago, and it was about the importance of making better decisions. Now, a fast food restaurant, the manager of a fast food restaurant at a very busy time noticed that one of her staff, who was a young, a college guy, 16 or 17 years old, it was a very busy time, and he was standing idly. He had a cleaning cloth in his hand, but he wasn't doing anything. Now, her normal reaction is to race over and tell him to start cleaning tables. But she'd had a huge amount of staff turnover, and she thought, well, maybe I need to do things a little differently. So she walked over to him and she said, "Did you see the mother and daughter on table 12 just a few minutes ago?" And the young fellow goes, "Yes." And she says, "I don't know whether you noticed, but when the mother went to the bathroom, the little girl got up on the table and started licking the table." It's so important. She walked away and looked back, and he was busy cleaning tables. And it's just a great example of how a simple change in approach can lead to a much better outcome, high level of performance, motivated employee. So, look, that's how you do it. You want to make a point, you find an example, and you use that basic story pattern. So that's kind of some of the key things. And I'll just remind you of this. Story is powerful because it has both logic and emotion. And this quote, as I say, this quote from Donald Kahn is one of my favorites. The next thing I want to talk to you about how valuable being specific is is about having more productive meetings. When you're presenting, when you're kind of leading a meeting, when you're a participant in a meeting, and particularly when you're giving one-on-one feedback in a performance review. So I'll just talk about a couple of those issues. Now, meetings are probably one of the most vilified parts of our organizational lives. People hate them. Well, a lot of people hate them, not everyone. They are a waste of time. They're boring. I walk out not knowing what to do. We have so many meetings and nothing comes of them, etc. And there's some good reasons why this is the case. In 2017, I was working with a leadership team, and about halfway through the day, one of the leaders said, he started talking about the issue of workplace harm, which is a very important issue. And he said, folks, this issue of workplace harm is really important. Every one of us needs to understand it. And he started talking. Now, I did what I normally do. I turned my stopwatch on and I waited 5 minutes. Now, he talked for 5 minutes and he was going to continue, but I interrupted him after the 5 minutes. And I said, Dean, can I just interrupt you and test what's happening in the room? Now, he wasn't very happy and he said, well, Mark, I'm not finished. But after a little bit of negotiation, he agreed. So I turned to the lady to my right and I said, so Dean was talking about a really important issue. He's very, very passionate about it. He spoke very articulately. He's a very impressive speaker. What did he say? And she looked up at me quite embarrassed and said, workplace harm is bad. So I turned to the gentleman to my left and I asked him the same question. Now his response was brutal. He just said, don't ask me, I've got nothing. I went around the room. There was 15 people in the room. No one could say very much. They couldn't relate almost anything about what Dean had said. And it's because he chose the assertion method. Instead of giving examples and being specific and having impact, he used opinions and assertions and statements and generalizations and abstractions that humans just don't respond well to. So many of our meetings, and I'll give you a little tip on how to monitor this. Many of our meetings are predominantly that style of communication. Lots of opinions, lots of assertions. And you can just change it. It's so simple. So when you're in a meeting that looks like this, where people are disengaged, bored, possibly checking their email, then, and if somebody's talking and they're talking about abstractions, etc., just ask them for an example. You just say something like, oh, could you give me an example of a time when you saw that happen? And you might be amazed at the change that you see come over that meeting. Because when somebody gives a specific example, you've got something concrete to talk about. It's a wonderful, the change it can bring. And of course, if you're the one who's talking and you notice that people are getting bored, that they're switching off, then that's a little sign to you that you need to be more specific. You need to have more impact. It's time for you to use an example. So if you are in a performance review, in 1999, a study was released by the Corporate Executive Board. And many of you will be aware of the Corporate Executive Board. They're now owned by Gartner. But they did a study, and it was not a small study. The sample size was N equals 90,000. So it's a huge study. So 1,200 companies across the globe. And one of the key findings of that, there were many, but one of the key findings was that particularly in performance reviews, you must ground any constructive feedback, read criticism, right? Any criticism, any shortfalls, you need to ground in specific instances. And way too often, as leaders, we cover up inadequacies by talking generally. So be more specific. It can help you make your job even easier. Now, I want you to focus firstly here on the image behind the words. Now, you can see that somebody's got a biro writing on a piece of paper. In Australia, we call it a Shears Tally, counting the number of sheep you've shorn. And I'd like you to do this in the next meeting that you attend. Take a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle. In the left-hand column, write the title, assertion. in the right-hand column, write story. And then just keep a tally of the number of times people say, I think, or in my view, or everybody knows this, or it's a fact that, and it always happens this way, right? Those are all going to be assertions. So whenever somebody says anything like that, make a mark in that left-hand column. The other thing you do is every time somebody gives an example, you make a mark in the right-hand column. So, and when I say gives an example, they tell a story. It's a series of events linked in a causal sequence that occurs at a time and a place that has characters, right? Things that you can see, moments, events. So almost certainly at the end of that meeting, you will have a lot of the tally marks in the left-hand column, almost none in the right-hand column. And by the way, as you're listening to presenters in this conference, do the same thing. And there'll be a strong correlation between better presenters and the people who use story. Anyway, for your next meeting, please try this. And by using story, you can make your meetings much more productive. They're concrete, they're engaging, and people understand and remember what you're saying. And they walk out feeling, well, they walk out feeling pretty good rather than walking out feeling disengaged. So our little gift to the world that Sean and I do is our podcast, because our objective is to help restore humanity to the workplace. And story is the tool that can be used to help accomplish that. It's not the only thing, but it is a very powerful tool. And we want more people to do it. And so each week we release a new podcast episode. And by the way, this is not a plug. This is our attempt to help give every leader across the world access to very, very usable business stories. So each week we take a story, we share it, we talk about why it works, and then how do you use it in a business context. And the idea is, if you like that, if you think you can use it, put it into your own story bank. Build your repertoire of stories. And our objective, if you use story and as a leader, you tap into this power of story, you can have more impact. You can be more engaging and essentially get better outcomes, better return on your leadership efforts. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. And I understand that there is time for questions. And if there was something in that 30 minutes that you thought you're interested in, as I say, it's kind of like a third gear tour. Maybe this is an opportunity to think about something that you saw on that little journey that you might want to know more about, and take the opportunity to ask a question. Back to you, Artem.
Mark, thank you once again. This was amazing, the moment you've talked to me about the topic before the conference. Thank you so much for sharing. Guys, we are looking forward to your questions in the chat box or in the question box. The links to the podcast are in the chat, so please feel free to listen. I am a fan, honestly. I've been listening for I guess 20 or 30 episodes full, but it's just getting better and better. So really, I have a question myself after listening to you. Well, since we are talking about being specific, the assertions also have their role in business, and people can often say to me, okay, data is an assertion. So is there a way to counter that and use specific language about the data?
Well, one of the beauties is that story becomes a little container for your data. And sorry, before I go into that, it's not, what I'm saying is not you must use story all the time, or there is no utility in assertion. No, there is a lot of utility in assertion. It's simply that we go to it almost exclusively. We're conditioned to default to it. And I don't want you to change that. I just want you to go, wow, maybe I should add some of these specific things in, these story things, and be more effective, right? It's the combination of both that makes you effective. And so you put them both together, and story becomes a delivery mechanism, a much more palatable delivery mechanism for your data. That's all that, it is. It's simply a tool. Don't think of it's definitely not an art. We all do it naturally, by the way, every human being. We do it naturally, but we go to work, and on the weekend, it's all barbecues and going to the going fishing or playing basketball, whatever. But at work, it's all about synergies and organizational strategic business performance improvement through the initiation of a few strategic principles and all that. Blah, blah, blah. So we just need to recognize that we make choices, and you can make different choices.
Awesome. I like the part with the choice as a human being. Siegfried is asking a great question. Is it possible to use stories too often?
Oh, Siegfried, that's a fabulous question, and one I get asked all the time. And look, absolutely it's possible to use stories too often. However, I haven't seen it. Like that's the last thing that you should worry about as a leader, because almost no leaders use any stories at all. So the challenge is not to go, oh, I can't, let's use it too much. The challenge is to start using it at all. And just to let you know, right? Just to let you know, there was a fabulous Brené Brown episode on Netflix, a special Netflix 1 hour thing of Brené Brown. And she told something like 47 stories in the space of 60 minutes. Some of them were only like a few seconds long. And Sean's written a long blog post about this where he deconstructs the entire thing. So go onto our website and do that. So yeah, you could conceivably use story too much. I haven't seen it. And Brené Brown, well, as I say, she used it's something like 47 stories in the space of 60 minutes. So,
wow.
Yeah.
It depends. Yeah, it's just amazing example. I've listened to Brené's book some years ago, and yes, she's totally a story person. Ilona has a great question too. Any other hints how to make meetings more effective? Which stories are better? I don't know if there's better to the story, but I want to hear your take on it. Well,
look, it's a really interesting question. Which stories are better? Because, and in my mind, I go, do we use a business story or a personal story or a story from history or a story about a research report? All of those are potentially usable. But just to give you an example, I was coaching somebody just recently, and she had a story, and she used it in a meeting like this. She's working in an organization to help build diversity and inclusion. Their project is going really well, but she's worried that people are getting complacent and they're taking their foot off the pedal at the time when they should be going hard. So she says, this is what I did in the meeting. So folks, I know we've done really, really well, and the temptation is to kind of relax a bit. But a few years ago, my husband and I were traveling around the world. We were backpacking. We had no money. And so we were conscious of every dollar we had. And we were in Iceland, and there was this famous cafe where you could get a muffin, like they're world famous for their muffins. I love muffins. And I paid €4 for a muffin and a cup of coffee. Like it was a lot of money because we didn't have much money. But it was my husband, and he said, look, that's a treat. So it was a beautiful day. We went outside, sitting on the waterfront, and I took a bite out of my muffin, and it was beautiful. And I kind of leaned back and just relaxed. And as I did that, a huge seagull swooped down and just took the muffin straight out of my hand and flew off with it. And my €4 is gone. Folks, I became complacent. Right? And I lost the entire muffin. So look, let's make sure this doesn't happen in our project, right? Let's just make sure we keep going.
Oh, great analogy there.
So
awesome.
Look, yeah, I'm just trying to, and I hope you see what I'm doing. You ask me a question, I try to answer in story.
Yeah, lovely, perfect, a perfect and clear message there, a clear business point. So thank you for that example. I hope. Yeah, Ilona also likes it. She says it's great. So, Mark, it's been a pleasure, and we have more questions, but we're running out of time to switch up to Sean. And I have a last question to you, which is the question I ask every speaker. So I want you to continue the phrase I made up. Let's imagine the story has come to life to teach leaders one thing and one thing only. If that happened, that one and only thing would be
that they made different choices about their communication, that they chose story more often.
Perfect. Make the choice to choose the story. Thank you so much, Mark. Guys listening to us, put the pluses, the fires, the exclamation mark, whatever you see fit to thank Mark for this. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for the opportunity, Adam, and have a great conference, everybody.